He found an abandoned alien child. 20 years later, she returned with an army. The wind on Ferrox didn't just blow, it scoured. It carried the taste of iron oxide and centuries of industrial neglect, a grit that settled into the pores and never really washed out. Jensen wiped a smear of grease from his forehead, leaving a dark streak across his brow that matched the charcoal grime beneath his fingernails. He leaned his weight against the rusted pry bar, the metal groaning in protest as he forced the casing of the derelict fusion turbine to give up its prize. "Come on, you stubborn bastard," Jensen grunted, his voice rough from years of breathing recycled air and silica dust. With a final, tortured screech of shearing metal, the casing popped free. Jensen stumbled back, catching his balance with the practiced ease of a man who spent his life on uneven terrain. He grinned, looking down at the pristine copper coil nestled inside the rot. It was beautiful. It was payday. It was enough credits to keep his atmospheric scrubbers running for another 6 months without having to beg the trade guilds for a loan. He reached for his canvas pack, ready to secure the loot, when the light changed. It wasn't the gradual dimming of the Ferrox sunset, which usually bruised the sky in shades of purple and sickly orange. This was sudden, absolute. It was as if someone had thrown a heavy blanket over the sun. The temperature dropped 10 degrees in a heartbeat, the wind dying instantly as the pressure in the canyon plummeted. Jensen looked up, shielding his amber eyes against the sudden gloom. His breath hitched in his throat. The sky wasn't empty anymore. It was choked with steel. Ships, thousands of them. They hung in the low orbit like a swarm of predatory insects, their hulls matte black and absorbing the light of the dying star. They were sleek, angular, and terrifyingly silent. There were no engine contrails, no sonic booms, just the oppressive weight of massive displacement. In the center of the formation hovered a dreadnought that defied logic, a floating city of jagged spires and glowing blue viewports that eclipsed the horizon. "Well," Jensen muttered, his grip tightening on the heavy iron pry bar. "That's not the Trade Federation." He didn't run. There was nowhere to run on Ferrox that a fleet like that couldn't scan. Jensen was a survivor, not a fool. He knew that when the sky filled with ships that didn't hail you, you were already dead. The only choice left was how you met the end. He tossed the copper coil into the dust. It was worthless now, and unholstered the kinetic pistol strapped to his thigh. It was a heavy, ugly weapon, modified to punch through scavenger plating, but against a war fleet it was little more than a noisemaker. A low hum vibrated through the soles of his boots, shaking the loose shale of the canyon floor. A dropship detached from the dreadnought's belly, falling toward his position with terrifying speed. It didn't burn thrusters until the last second, a burst of blue plasma that turned the sand to glass as it touched down 50 meters away. The ramp hissed open. Jensen raised the pistol, his other hand gripping the pry bar like a club. He stood with his feet apart, his broad, work-hardened shoulders squared. The wind whipped his gray-streaked hair across his eyes, but he didn't blink. Soldiers poured out. They moved like water, fluid and synchronized. They wore full body armor in a dark, shifting gray, their faces hidden behind bioluminescent blue visors that glowed with a cold, unfeeling light. They didn't shout, they didn't flank him. They simply formed a perfect semicircle, weapons raised, sleek rifles that hummed with contained energy. There were 50 of them. One of him. "Right then," Jensen said, his voice steady despite the adrenaline flooding his veins. "Let's make this expensive for you." The ranks of the soldiers parted. They moved with a snap of precision that spoke of endless drilling, creating a wide lane down the center. Something else was coming down the ramp. She was enormous. That was his first thought. She stood nearly 7 feet tall, towering over the soldiers, a vision of lethal elegance clad in segmented silver battleplate that clung to her powerful frame like a second skin. Her skin was a deep, vibrant violet, smooth and flawless against the harsh, rusted backdrop of Ferrox. A mane of silver-white hair cascaded down her back, moving slightly as if it had a life of its own, and a metallic, organic-looking crown framed her temples. She walked toward him, ignoring the armed standoff. Her gait was predatory, the roll of her hips and the set of her shoulders radiating a terrifying kind of authority. Jensen didn't lower his weapon, but his finger hesitated on the trigger. She wasn't wearing a helmet. Her eyes, solid pools of glowing mercury with no whites, locked onto him. They burned with an intensity that made his skin prickle. She stopped 5 paces away. The soldiers tensed, their rifles humming louder, waiting for the command to vaporize him. Jensen looked up at her, breathing hard. He took in the sharp claws on her gauntlets, the glowing cyan accents on her armor, and the sheer, overwhelming presence of her. She looked like a goddess of war carved from amethyst and starlight. "You're trespassing," Jensen growled, the absurdity of the statement almost making him laugh. "This is a private claim?" The giant woman tilted her head. The movement was avian, sharp and inquisitive. Her mercury eyes scanned him, starting at his worn boots, traveling up his grease-stained trousers, over the kinetic mesh vest, and resting on his face. She stared at the jagged, pale scar that ran from his left temple to his cheekbone. Her lips, painted a dark indigo, parted slightly. "Stand down," she said. Her voice wasn't what he expected. It wasn't a booming command. It was a rich, multitonal resonance that seemed to vibrate inside his chest. The soldiers instantly lowered their rifles, the hum of energy dying out. Jensen didn't lower his. "I don't take orders from invaders." The woman stepped closer, closing the distance until the barrel of his pistol was inches from her abdominal plating. She didn't even look at the gun. She raised a hand, her long, silver-tipped fingers hovering inches from his face. "You have aged," she whispered, the alien cadence of her accent stretching the vowels. "The years have been heavy on you, Jensen." Jensen froze. The pry bar slipped from his sweating palm and clattered onto the rocks. The sound of the pry bar hitting the ground echoed in the silence of the canyon. Jensen stared at the violet-skinned warlord, his mind racing, gears grinding against the rust of 2 decades of solitude. "How do you know my name?" he demanded, though the steadiness of his aim was beginning to falter. She ignored the question, her hand finally closing the distance to cup his cheek. Her skin was cool, smooth as polished marble, but the strength behind her touch was undeniable. Her thumb traced the line of the scar on his temple, a gesture so intimate and familiar that it sent a shockwave through his nervous system. "You gave this to yourself," she said softly, her mercury eyes swirling with an emotion he couldn't place. "Protecting me. The beast had you pinned. You took the blow meant for my throat." The memory hit him like a physical blow. 20 years ago, the scrap heaps of Sector 4. He had been younger, angrier, scavenging for parts to fix a broken transport. He had found a small, shivering thing huddled under a sheet of corrugated tin. A runt. Violet skin, barely the size of a human child, starving and terrified. He hadn't known what species she was, he hadn't cared. He had shared his protein paste with her. 2 days later, a feral scrap hound the size of a bear had cornered them. Jensen had jammed a hydrospanner into the beast's jaws, but not before its claws had raked his face. He had bled. She had screamed, a high, piercing sound that shattered glass. And then, the next morning, she was gone. Taken by slavers, or so he had assumed. He had mourned the little runt for a week. Jensen lowered the pistol slowly, his eyes widening as he looked up at the 7-foot-tall Empress of the Void standing before him. "Runt?" he breathed, the word feeling ridiculous in the face of the armada behind her. A slow, terrifying smile spread across her face, revealing teeth that were slightly too sharp to be human. "I am Vraxia now, matriarch of the High Caste, Empress of the Void-Horde." She leaned down, bringing her face level with his. "But to you, I am the one you fed when the galaxy would have let me starve." Jensen swallowed hard. "You did all right for yourself." "I did what was necessary," Vraxia said, straightening up. Her demeanor shifted instantly from intimate to imperial. She turned to the soldiers who were standing like statues. "Secure the perimeter. No one touches him. If he is harmed, I will flay the skin from your bones myself." "Wait a minute," Jensen said, holstering his pistol and stepping back. "I'm not going anywhere with you. I have a job. I have a shop." Vraxia turned back to him, her expression baffled, as if he had just suggested he preferred to eat gravel. "You live in squalor, Jensen. You scrape a living from the refuse of better worlds. I have returned to correct this error." "It's not an error," Jensen snapped, his pride flaring. "It's my life. I built it. I fix things. That's what I do." "And now you will fix things for me," she declared, as if the matter were settled. She gestured to the dropship. You are coming with me. I'm not a prisoner, Vraxia, he warned, his hand drifting back toward his weapon. No, she agreed, stepping closer again, her bioluminescent eyes narrowing. You are not a prisoner. You are mine. Before Jensen could process the possessive weight of that word, she moved. It was a blur of motion too fast for his human eyes to track. One moment she was standing in front of him. The next, he felt a sharp pinch on his neck, a sedative patch. Damn it, Jensen slurred, his knees buckling. Vraxia caught him easily, scooping him up into her arms as if he weighed nothing more than a child. He struggled weakly, pushing against the cold plating of her chest armor, but his limbs felt like they were filled with lead. Sleep, Jensen, she commanded, her voice vibrating against his ear. When you wake, you will never know hunger or cold again. I hate cold, Jensen mumbled, his consciousness fading into the black. As he drifted under, he felt the vibration of the dropship's engines engaging. He was leaving Ferrox. He was leaving the only home he had known for 20 years, and he was being carried into the stars by a woman who looked at him not like a man, but like a holy relic she had finally recovered from the dirt. The last thing he heard was the sharp, rhythmic clash of the soldiers slapping their chest plates in salute as their queen passed, carrying her prize. Jensen woke to the smell of nothing. That was the first thing that alerted him. Ferrox always smelled of rust and sulfur. His workshop smelled of oil and ionized air. This air was sterile, filtered to an aggressive purity that made his nose itch. He sat up, gasping, and immediately regretted the speed. His head spun, the after effects of the sedative patch. He blinked, waiting for his vision to clear. He was in a room that was larger than his entire workshop. The walls were curved, made of a dark, shimmering metal that seemed to absorb the ambient light. One entire wall was a viewport, looking out into the streaks of hyperspace, a blue shift tunnel of infinite speed. The floor was padded with a material that felt like warm velvet under his bare feet. Bare feet. Jensen looked down. He had been stripped. His heavy canvas trousers, his tactical shirt, his boots, all gone. In their place, he was wearing loose-fitting trousers made of a silk-like gray fabric and a matching tunic that left his arms bare. He stood up, his anger rising like a tide. He felt exposed without the weight of his tool belt. He paced to the door, a seamless oval in the wall, and slapped the panel. Nothing. Locked. Computer? He barked, his voice raspy. Open the door. Access denied, a synthetic voice replied instantly. Consort designate security clearance is restricted to the habitation suite. Consort designate? Jensen spat the words out. He looked around the room. It was filled with luxuries. A massive bed covered in furs, a spread of exotic fruits on a low table, a bathing pool steaming with scented water. It was a cage. A very expensive, very comfortable cage. He began to search the room, not for comfort, but for weaknesses. He ran his hands along the wall seams, looking for a panel, a loose rivet, anything. The construction was flawless, too flawless. It annoyed him. Nothing should be this perfect. It meant it couldn't be fixed when it inevitably broke. The door hissed open behind him. Jensen spun around, dropping into a defensive crouch, his hands curled into fists. Vraxia stood in the doorway. She had removed her armor. She wore a long, flowing gown of translucent silver mesh that draped over her violet skin, leaving little to the imagination. The fabric clung to her muscular thighs and the swell of her hips, shimmering with every movement. Her feet were bare, silent on the floor. She carried a tray with a decanter of amber liquid. She looked at him, her eyes softening. "You are awake," she said, her voice dropping an octave. "I trust the accommodations are suitable?" Jensen straightened up, crossing his arms over his chest. "Where are my clothes, Vraxia?" "Incinerated," she said casually, setting the tray down on a table. "They were filthy. You were covered in carcinogens and grease. I had you decontaminated while you slept." "That filth was my work," Jensen said, his voice hard. "And you don't get to strip me and lock me up. I'm not one of your soldiers." "No," Vraxia said, gliding toward him. "You are far more valuable than a soldier. Soldiers are easily replaced. There is only one of you." She stopped inches from him. The height difference was stark. He had to crane his neck to look her in the eye. She smelled of rain and charged static, a scent that was intoxicating and dangerous. "You kidnapped me," Jensen said, holding his ground. "I rescued you," she corrected, reaching out to touch his arm. Her fingers trailed over the rough skin of his bicep, feeling the muscle beneath. "You saved me from the beasts, Jensen. Did you think I would leave you to rot on that dead world?" "I was free on that dead world," Jensen countered, pulling his arm away. "Here, I'm just a pet." Vraxia's eyes narrowed, the bioluminescence flaring brighter. "You are not a pet, you are my intended. In my culture, when a life debt is owed of this magnitude, it is repaid through union. I have conquered 12 systems, Jensen. I have burned worlds and silenced stars. I did it all to build an empire safe enough for you." Jensen stared at her. The sheer scale of her obsession was terrifying. She wasn't just a warlord. She was a force of nature that had fixated on him. "You can't just conquer a person, Vraxia," he said, trying to make her understand. "Relationships, they don't work like invasions. You don't just land a fleet and declare victory." "Why not?" she asked, genuinely confused. "I want you. You are here. I have provided for you. Is this not how humans mate?" Jensen let out a short, dry laugh. "No, not even close. If you want me, you have to earn it, and locking me in a room isn't the way to start." Vraxia stepped back, her expression shifting from confusion to a simmering challenge. She looked him up and down, her gaze lingering on his chest. "Then I shall earn it," she purred, the sound rumbling in her throat. "But do not mistake my patience for weakness, Jensen. You are on my ship. You are in my sky, and, sooner or later, you will realize that you belong to me." She turned and walked to the door. "Eat, rest. We arrive at the capital sector in 2 cycles." The door hissed shut, locking with a definitive thud. Jensen stared at the metal surface for a long moment. Then he turned and looked at the control panel for the bathing pool. It was a digital interface, sleek and encrypted. He knelt down next to it. He didn't have his tools, but he had something better. He had boredom, and he had 20 years of making broken things work. He reached under the rim of the panel and felt for the maintenance release. "Earn it," he muttered to himself. "Let's see how you handle a breakout." It took Jensen 3 hours to bypass the lock on the service hatch behind the bathing pool. It was a clumsy job. He had used the metal prong from a fruit fork he'd snapped off and bent into a pick, combined with a sheer brute force override of the circuit using the conductivity of a spilled pitcher of water. The door hadn't opened so much as short-circuited and died, sliding half open with a smell of ionized air. "Too easy," Jensen whispered, wiping his wet hands on his tunic. He squeezed through the gap, emerging into the maintenance corridors that ran like arteries behind the ship's sleek skin. This was more like it. The air here was hot, smelling of coolant and ionized air. It was dark, lit only by the blinking red LEDs of server banks. He moved silently, his bare feet finding purchase on the grating. He wasn't trying to escape the ship. He wasn't stupid. There was nowhere to go in hyperspace. But he needed to know what he was dealing with. He needed to find the engine room. On every ship in every fleet, the engine room was the heart. If you controlled the engine, you controlled the ship. He navigated by the sound of the thrumming drive core, descending 3 levels until the vibration rattled his teeth. He found the engineering deck. It was a cavernous space, dominated by a pulsing singularity drive contained within a massive magnetic field. Dozens of technicians, aliens of various species, mostly subservient castes, scuttled around, monitoring holograms. Jensen stayed in the shadows of a ventilation overhang, watching. Something was wrong. The hum of the drive wasn't a clean sine wave. There was a stutter, a microfracture in the containment rhythm. It was subtle, something a computer might smooth over in the readouts, but Jensen could feel it. It was the sound of a bearing about to seize, magnified to a galactic scale. He watched a technician approach a console near the core. The alien tapped a few screens, looked confused, and then simply reset the warning light. "Idiots," Jensen hissed under his breath. "You don't reset a variance warning on a singularity drive." He moved closer, unable to help himself. He saw the coolant lines running into the main injector. One of them was vibrating at a different frequency than the others. Cavitation. There was air or vacuum bubble in the line. If that bubble hit the injector, boom. No more Empress, no more Jensen. He dropped from the overhang, landing in a crouch behind a bank of capacitors. He waited for the technician to turn away, then bolted for the console. His fingers flew across the alien interface. It was intuitive enough. Physics was physics, no matter the language. He brought up the flow schematics. Pressure spike in valve 4, he muttered. Bypasses here. He manually engaged the emergency flush sequence. The pipes hissed violently, steam venting from the floor grates. The technicians shouted in alarm, spinning around. "Who is that?" one of them shrieked. Jensen ignored them. He grabbed a manual wheel on the side of the injector casing and wrenched it hard to the left, physically forcing the valve to seat properly. The vibration in the floor smoothed out instantly. The hum became a perfect, deadly purr. "Step away from the console." Jensen turned. 10 guards had weapons trained on him. But behind them, the blast doors slid open. Vraxia strode in, flanked by her second-in-command, a towering four-armed male named Kale. She looked furious, her eyes blazing. "Jensen!" she roared. "You escaped confinement to sabotage my ship?" Jensen leaned back against the console, crossing his arms. He didn't look afraid. He looked disappointed. "Sabotage?" He pointed a thumb at the drive core. "I just saved your life, Your Highness. Your cavitation dampeners are shot. Your crew was ignoring a variance that would have turned this ship into a supernova in about 10 minutes. Vraxia froze. She looked at the console, then at the head technician. The technician was trembling, their skin paling. "Is this true?" she demanded, her voice ice-cold. "Highness, the sensors showed green," the technician stammered. "We thought it was a sensor ghost." "Machines lie," Jensen said, cutting in. "Sensors fail. You have to listen to the engine. You built this fleet for war, Vraxia, but you didn't build it to last. It's bleeding energy. It's too perfect on the surface and rotting underneath." Vraxia looked at Jensen. For the first time, the arrogance in her posture cracked. She looked at the grease on his hands, fresh grease from her own ship. She looked at the intensity in his eyes. She waved her hand. "Leave us." "Highness," Kyle protested, his voice a deep rasp. "He is a security risk. He tampered with the core." "I said leave us," Vraxia snarled, her claws extending. The crew and Kale scrambled out, Araso, the blast doors sealing with a hiss. Vraxia walked toward Jensen. She didn't touch him this time. She stopped a few feet away, looking at the drive core, then back at him. "My people," she started, her voice unusually quiet. "We are the High Caste. We were genetically designed by the precursors to be the ultimate warriors. We are strong, fast, intelligent, but we do not create. We do not repair. We conquer, we use, and when things break, we discard them and take new ones." She looked at her hands. "Our fleet is decaying. My scientists cannot fix the degradation because the technology is ancient, inherited. We are dying, Jensen, slowly. Our ships, our bodies, we are burning out." She looked up at him, and the vulnerability in her eyes was devastating. "I didn't just come back for you because I remembered your kindness," she admitted. "I came back because I remembered that you could fix the unfixable. I need your chaos, Jensen. I need your human ability to see the flaw and mend it. Without you, the Void-Horde falls." Jensen looked at her. The dynamic shifted. He wasn't just a prize anymore. He was the lifeline. "So," Jensen said, wiping his hands on his silk trousers, "you don't need a consort. You need a chief engineer." Vraxia took a step closer, the heat radiating from her body palpable. "I need both." The revelation hung in the air between them, heavy and electric. Jensen looked at the mighty Empress of the Void and saw the cracks in the armor, not physical, but existential. "You want me to fix your fleet?" Jensen said, his voice flat. "And in exchange, what? I get to be the best-dressed prisoner in the galaxy?" Vraxia bristled, her pride flaring up again. "You would be consort prime. You would command respect. You would have access to technology your species can only dream of." "I don't care about the tech if I can't leave," Jensen countered. Before Vraxia could respond, the ship lurched violently. Gravity failed for a split second, sending Jensen floating upward before slamming him back onto the deck plating. The red emergency lights bathed the engine room in blood-colored strobes. Sirens began to wail, a harsh, discordant shriek. "Report!" Vraxia shouted at the air, tapping her comms bead. "Hull breach in Sector 7, a voice crackled. It was Kale. "Stabilizers are offline. We are caught in the gravity well of the nebula. The shields are failing." "That's impossible," Vraxia snapped. "The shields were at full power." Jensen was already moving. He slid across the floor to the main terminal, ignoring Vraxia's startled look. He pulled up the diagnostic. "It's not a failure," Jensen yelled over the siren. "It's a command override. Someone shut down the magnetic stabilizers manually." "Kale," Vraxia hissed, the realization dawning on her. "He commands the bridge." The ship groaned, a terrifying sound of metal twisting under immense pressure. The floor tilted sharply to the right. "We're entering a gravity shear," Jensen shouted, his fingers flying across the controls. "If we don't equalize the thrust, the ship snaps in half." "Can you fix it?" Vraxia demanded, bracing herself against a conduit. "I can't fix it from here. The bridge has locked out the digital controls." Jensen looked around frantically. "I need to manually vector the thrusters. I need to get to the sub-level hydraulics." "That area is unshielded," Vraxia said, grabbing his arm. "The radiation from the nebula will kill me in an hour," Jensen finished. "Good thing this will only take 5 minutes. Let go." He wrenched his arm free and sprinted toward the access ladder. Vraxia watched him go, then made a noise of frustration and followed him. "You cannot go alone," she roared. They descended into the belly of the ship. The heat here was oppressive, the air thick with steam and the metallic taste of radiation. The ship bucked again, throwing them against the walls. Jensen scrambled toward a massive bank of hydraulic pistons that controlled the engine nozzles. "Hold that lever!" Jensen pointed to a release valve that was twice the size of his head. Vraxia grabbed it. Her muscles bulged as she fought the pressure. "It is stuck! Kick it!" Jensen yelled. "Percussive maintenance!" Vraxia didn't hesitate. She delivered a kick that would have shattered a tank. The lever slammed down. "Now!" Jensen grabbed a giant wrench from a wall mount, finally, a tool, and jammed it into the gear assembly of the stuck thruster. He hauled on it with everything he had, veins popping in his neck. "Turn, you piece of junk!" The ship shuddered. The gear groaned, slipped, and then caught. The thruster vectored. The violent shaking stopped instantly as the ship aligned with the gravity stream. Jensen collapsed against the piping, chest heaving, sweat soaking his gray tunic. He looked up. Vraxia was staring at him. Her hair was wild, her chest heaving. She looked at him with an expression that was no longer just possession. It was awe. "You stabilized it," she breathed. "With a metal stick and brute force." "Leverage," Jensen corrected, panting. "It's called leverage." He tried to stand, but his legs wobbled. The radiation alarm on the wall was pinging softly. Vraxia was there in an instant. She scooped him up, not with the arrogance of before, but with urgent protectiveness. "We must get you to the medbay," she said, her voice fierce. "If Kyle thinks he can kill you to weaken me, he has made a grave error." She carried him up the ladder, moving with desperate speed. Jensen looked at her profile, the set of her jaw, the fire in her eyes. "He didn't do it to weaken you," Jensen murmured, his head resting against her armored shoulder. "He did it because he knows you're listening to me." Vraxia looked down at him, and for the first time, her mercury eyes looked human. "Yes," she said. "I am." The medbay was a blur of white light and stinging antiseptic sprays. The autodocs flushed the radiation from Jensen's system, a process that felt like ice water replacing his blood. When it was over, he sat on the edge of the biobed, shivering slightly. Vraxia dismissed the medics. She locked the door. The ship was stable, humming quietly again, but the atmosphere inside the room was volatile. The adrenaline of the near-death experience was still coursing through both of them. Vraxia paced the room. She looked at Jensen, then away, then back again. Her bioluminescence was pulsing rapidly, shifting from calm blue to a turbulent violet. "You could have died," she said, her voice tight. Occupational hazard, Jensen replied, rubbing his shoulder. If I hadn't gone down there, we'd be space dust. Vraxia stopped pacing. She stalked toward him, stopping between his spread knees. She towered over him, but this time she lowered herself, resting her hands on the bio-bed on either side of his hips, trapping him. Why? She asked, searching his face. You claim to be a prisoner. You claim to hate this cage. Why save the ship? Why save me? Jensen looked into her glowing eyes. He could have lied. He could have said it was self-preservation, but he was tired of lying. Because you're not just a warlord, Vraxia, he said quietly. You're still the runt I found in the scrap heap, and I don't let my people die. The word hung in the air. My people. Vraxia let out a shaky breath. I am not a runt. I am a queen. You're both, Jensen said. He reached up, his hand hesitating for a moment before cupping her cheek, his thumb brushing the smooth violet skin. And you're scared. You've got an army, a fleet, and a galaxy afraid of you, but you're terrified because you know it's all falling apart. Vraxia leaned into his touch, her eyes fluttering shut. The barrier between them, the wall of rank and species and conquest, shattered. Make it hold together, Jensen, she whispered, her voice trembling. Make me hold together. She surged forward, capturing his lips. It wasn't a gentle kiss, it wasn't collision. It tasted of static electricity and desperation. Vraxia kissed like she conquered. Overwhelming, demanding, consuming. Her claws dug slightly into the mattress, restraining her own strength to keep from hurting him. Jensen didn't pull away. He met her intensity, his hands tangling in her silver hair, pulling her closer. He was a man who worked with steel and fire. He wasn't afraid of heat. She climbed onto his lap, straddling him, the weight of her solid and grounding. Her skin felt hot against his. The dynamic flipped. She was physically superior in every way, yet she was clinging to him as if he were the only solid thing in the universe. Jensen, she gasped against his neck, her sensory tendrils brushing his skin, sending shivers down his spine. I will burn the galaxy for you. Don't burn it, Jensen groaned, his hands exploring the muscular curve of her back. Just be here. Be real. She pulled back, looking at him with a raw, naked hunger. I am here. She stripped off the mesh gown. Her body was a masterpiece of alien biology, sleek, powerful, marked with iridescent patterns that glowed in the dim light. She was terrifyingly beautiful. Jensen pulled her down. The romance of the moment wasn't soft. It was the friction of two different worlds grinding together, creating sparks. It was the scavenger and the queen, finding a common language in the dark. The piece lasted exactly 2 hours. Jensen lay awake, watching the bioluminescent patterns on Vraxia's sleeping form fade to a soft, rhythmic pulse. She looked peaceful, younger. Suddenly, the ship's comms system crackled to life, overriding the privacy locks. Attention, Void-Horde! Kyle's voice boomed, distorted and harsh. The matriarch has been compromised. She has been corrupted by the biological weakness of the human parasite. She risks the fleet for his safety. By the right of casting, I assume command. Vraxia's eyes snapped open. She didn't groggily wake up. She went from asleep to combat-ready in a microsecond. Kale, she snarled, rolling off the bed. The lights in the room turned red. The door lock engaged with a heavy clank. He's locking us in, Jensen said, pulling on his trousers. He's going to vent the atmosphere in this sector. He dares? Vraxia grabbed her armor, pieces magnetizing to her skin. I will rip his arms off. We can't fight him if we can't breathe, Jensen said. He looked at the ventilation grate high on the wall. Vraxia, the vents. I cannot fit in there, she said, looking at the narrow opening. No, Jensen said, grabbing a metal tray from the table to use as a screwdriver. But I can. I can get to the manual override for the door from the outside. You hold the room. Jensen, no. Vraxia grabbed his wrist. Kale's death squads will be patrolling. You are unarmed. Jensen looked at her. I'm a mechanic on a ship that's falling apart. I'm the most dangerous thing on this boat. Trust me. He kissed her quickly, hard, then scrambled up the shelving unit and pried the grate loose. He shimmied into the darkness of the shaft, just as the hiss of depressurization began in the hallway outside. The shaft was tight, claustrophobic. Jensen crawled on his elbows, the metal biting into his skin. He had to move fast. He visualized the ship's schematics he had seen in engineering. He dropped out of a vent 3 corridors away. The hallway was empty, bathed in emergency lighting. He needed a weapon. He found a maintenance locker. No guns, but there was a plasma cutter and a canister of pressurized coolant. Good enough, he muttered. He heard heavy footsteps. A squad of 3 soldiers turned the corner. They saw him and raised their rifles. Jensen didn't fight them. He rolled a canister of industrial lubricant across the floor and shot it with the plasma cutter. The canister exploded, coating the floor and the soldiers' visors in slick, opaque foam. The soldiers slipped, crashing into each other, their rifles firing wildly into the ceiling. Jensen sprinted past them, sliding on the grease, and slammed his shoulder into the access panel for the bridge elevator. He ripped the wires out and sparked them together. The elevator didn't come. Kyle had locked it down. Fine, Jensen panted. Stairs it is, 30 flights. He began to climb. He was 20 years older than these soldiers. He didn't have power armor, but he had rage and he had a promise to keep. As he climbed, he used the ship against them. He severed steam pipes to create scalding barriers. He rewired lighting panels to strobe and blind the pursuers. He was a ghost in the machine, turning the flagship into a haunted house for the highly trained, rigid soldiers who didn't know how to handle chaos. He reached the bridge access. It was heavily guarded. There was no way to sneak past. Jensen tapped his comms bead. He had stolen one from an unconscious guard. Oryx, he whispered, hoping the tech prime was listening. Oryx, if you want your engines to keep running, you're going to open the blast doors on the bridge, now. There was a pause, then a static-filled voice. The High Commander will execute me. If Vraxia dies, the fleet dies, Jensen said. You saw the readouts. I'm the only one who can fix the rot. Choose. Tradition or survival? The blast doors groaned. The locks disengaged. Jensen smiled grimly. Good choice. The bridge of the Dreadnought was a vast, circular amphitheater of war. Kale stood in the center, his 4 arms crossed, watching the main view screen which showed the fleet falling into formation behind him. The blast doors hissed open. Kyle turned, expecting his guards. Instead, he saw Jensen. The human was bleeding from a cut on his forehead. His tunic was torn, revealing bruised skin. He held a plasma cutter in one hand and a heavy pipe wrench in the other. He looked small, fragile, and utterly unimpressed. You, Kale rumbled, his voice dripping with contempt. The pet has escaped his cage. I told you, Jensen called out, his voice echoing in the silent bridge. I'm not a pet. I'm the maintenance guy, and you're breaking my ship. Kill him, Kale ordered the bridge guards. Wait, Jensen shouted. He held up a small remote detonator, actually just a garage door opener he'd kept in his pocket for 20 years, but they didn't know that. I rigged the singularity drive. You fire, I blow the magnetic containment. We all turn into stardust. The guards hesitated. The fear of the void was deep in their species. He is bluffing, Kale roared. Humans are cowards. Try me, Jensen said, his eyes hard. I've got nothing to lose. I'm just a scavenger. You're the one with an empire to lose. It was the human element, the bluff, the ability to look death in the eye and lie with a straight face. The logical Xylarthian minds couldn't compute the irrationality of suicide, so they froze. In that second of hesitation, the ventilation grate above the command throne exploded outward. Vraxia dropped from the ceiling. She landed in a crouch, her armor retracted, her claws fully extended. She let out a shriek that shattered the tactical displays. Kale! She screamed. Chaos erupted. The guards turned to fire at her, but she was a whirlwind of violet and silver. She moved faster than they could track, disarming one, throwing another across the room. Jensen didn't stand still. He sprinted forward, sliding under a guard's aim, and jammed the plasma cutter into the servo joint of the guard's knee armor. The leg locked up, and the guard toppled. Jensen swung the pipe wrench, cracking the visor. He wasn't fighting with grace. He was fighting dirty. He used elbows, knees, tools. He fought like a man who had survived scrap hounds and sandstorms. Vraxia reached Kyle. The two clashed in a blur of motion. Kyle was stronger, his forearms allowing him to block and strike simultaneously. He caught Vraxia by the throat, lifting her off the ground. "You are weak," Kyle shouted. "You have let emotions corrupt your blood." Vraxia clawed at his arm, gasping. Jensen saw it. He was across the room. He couldn't reach them in time. He looked down at the console next to him. Gravity control. "Hey, Kale!" Jensen yelled. Kale looked over. Jensen slammed his fist onto the gravity reversal toggle for the command platform. Gravity instantly flipped in a 10-meter radius around the throne. Kale, expecting gravity to pull him down, was thrown upward toward the ceiling. He released Vraxia in surprise. Vraxia, who had seen Jensen's hand move, twisted in midair, kicking off the ceiling as she flipped. She used the momentum to drive her heels into Kyle's chest, slamming him back down to the deck as Jensen normalized the gravity. Crack! Kale hit the floor hard, the wind knocked out of him. Before he could rise, Vraxia's foot was on his throat, her claws poised over his eyes. The bridge fell silent. The guards lowered their weapons. Jensen walked over, panting, twirling the pipe wrench. He stood next to Vraxia. "Told you," Jensen said to the room. "Leverage!" Vraxia stood over Kale, her chest heaving. The bioluminescence of her eyes was blindingly bright, fueled by rage. "I should end you," she hissed, "for treason, for touching him." Kale looked up, defeated but defiant. "Do it. Prove that you are strong." Vraxia raised her claws. "Don't," Jensen said. Vraxia froze. She looked at Jensen. "He tried to kill us. Mercy is a weakness." "Killing him makes him a martyr to the traditionalists," Jensen said, his voice calm. "It proves him right, that you rule by brute force alone. You want to change your people? You want to fix the rot? Show them something new." "What would you have me do?" she asked. "Exile," Jensen said. "Send him to Ferrox. Let him see what it's like to survive with nothing. Let him scavenge. If he survives, maybe he'll learn something. If he doesn't, well, the scrap hounds have to eat too." Vraxia looked at Kale. The humiliation of being stripped of rank and sent to a rust world was a fate far crueler than a warrior's death. "You heard the consort prime," Vraxia announced, her voice ringing out. "Strip him. Send him to the surface." Two guards grabbed Kale, who looked at Jensen with a mixture of hatred and grudging terror. As they dragged him away, Vraxia turned to the rest of the bridge crew. "Return to stations," she commanded. "We have repairs to make." The crew scrambled to obey, moving with a new kind of energy. They weren't just following orders anymore. They were following a leader who had survived the unthinkable. Vraxia turned to Jensen. She reached out, running a hand over the cut on his forehead. "You fought," she said softly. "You fought for me." "I fought for us," Jensen corrected. He took her hand, interlacing his grease-stained fingers with her elegant ones. "We make a good team. You break them, I fix the mess." Vraxia laughed, a sound that was rich and genuine. "Is that how you see it?" "Pretty much," Jensen smiled. "But we need to set some ground rules. No more locking me in rooms. No more pet talk." "Agreed," Vraxia nodded. "But I make no promises about the consort title. That I intend to keep." "I can live with that," Jensen said, "as long as I get my own workshop on the ship. And coffee, real coffee, not this synthetic sludge." "It shall be done," Vraxia vowed. She leaned in, resting her forehead against his. The bridge crew watched, pretending not to, as the terrifying Empress and the Scavenger stood amidst the wreckage of the mutiny, holding each other up. 6 months later, the dreadnought Eclipse hung in orbit over the shipyard of Antares Prime. It didn't look like the ominous shadow that had darkened the skies of Ferrox. It gleamed. The hull had been reinforced with new alloys, the drive signature was clean and efficient, and the ominous silence was replaced by the busy hum of industry. Jensen stood on the observation deck, looking out at the fleet. He wore a uniform now, black and gray, practical but authoritative, with the insignia of the High Architect on the collar. But his hands were still stained with grease, and he still carried a hydro spanner in his belt. Report on the retrofit? Jensen asked. Tech Prime Oryx stood beside him, holding a datapad. The new coolant systems are operating at 110% efficiency, Architect. The variance is gone. The fleet is healthy. Good, Jensen nodded. Keep the rotation schedule. Don't let the maintenance backlog build up again. Yes, Architect. Oryx bowed and scurried off. Jensen leaned against the railing. He felt a presence behind him. Vraxia wrapped her arms around his waist, resting her chin on his shoulder. She wore ceremonial robes of white and gold, but underneath he knew she was wearing the combat bodysuit he had designed for her. One that offered better protection and flexibility. You look tired, she murmured, kissing the scar on his temple. The fleet is big, Jensen sighed comfortably. Lots of moving parts. You could delegate, she teased, and let them mess up my calibration? Not a chance. Vraxia turned him around. She looked radiant. The stress lines that had defined her face when they met were gone. She ruled now not with fear but with confidence. The Void-Horde was no longer a swarm of locusts. It was a peacekeeping force, a builder of worlds. Do you regret it? She asked suddenly. Leaving your solitude? Jensen looked past her, at the stars. He thought about the silence of Ferrox, the wind, the loneliness he had told himself was freedom. Then he looked at her. He looked at the fleet he had healed. He looked at the woman who had crossed the galaxy to find him. One choice rewrites destiny, he quoted the old spacer proverb. I chose to feed a runt. Best decision I ever made. Vraxia smiled, her eyes glowing with love. And I chose to come back. The second best decision. Second best? Jensen raised an eyebrow. The best, she whispered, pulling him toward the door to their private quarters. Was letting you fix me. Jensen laughed, allowing himself to be led away. I didn't fix you, Vraxia. I just tightened a few loose screws. Then come, Architect, she purred. I believe I require maintenance. The door slid shut behind them, leaving the fleet to hum in the darkness, a symphony of alien power and human ingenuity, singing a song of unity across the stars.